Okay, so welcome to a gorgeous explanation on why the MCU sucks and they did a horrible job establishing Endgame. So in Avengers Endgame, we establish that when you travel back in time, so this pencil fucking sucks. When you travel back in time, this is your normal timeline. You travel back in time. This makes a different timeline. So anything you do in this timeline does not affect this timeline. This timeline stays the same. And then when you go back to this timeline, you pop back right here. You're back in the timeline. Anything that happened here did not happen here. Did not happen. So you can do whatever you want here, won't affect that. You can take what you want here, won't affect that. It's a different branch. It doesn't matter. However, in Avengers Endgame, we take the main timeline. We'll call this 1999 because that's what it's actually called. And this goes about like normal. Now, here, we're going to have Steve. Yeah. And then, like here, we'll say this is when he leaves the 40s. So if Steve goes back in time to the 40s, it's going to create a different branch of the timeline. What do we know about different branches of the timeline? It doesn't affect anything that happens here. So if he continues to live his life normally from when he left the 40s, when he died, but not really, this creates a new timeline. So therefore, when we get to 2023, which is when this takes place, in new 2023, the timeline will have been completely different because let's say he marries Peggy Carter because we don't care about like her husband or children or anything. You know, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. anyway. Who cares? Anyway, so let's say that happens here. Didn't happen here because if it had, that would have drastically affected this. And also, that's not how they establish time travel is working. So he travels here. Everything goes about completely differently. Let's say Sharon Carter probably didn't snog her, so we'll cross that off the timeline. Anything that happened in Agent Carter, cross that off the timeline. The Avengers, probably also going to be different, so we'll cross that off the timeline. If the Avengers didn't happen, Thanos probably won't happen. So basically, Avengers Endgame won't happen. Blip won't happen. Everything will live about like normal. Anyone that died there probably won't be dying this time around. Everything's fine. However, as I said, this is a completely different timeline. So him aging all the way up to 2023 here doesn't happen there. So when we see him in Avengers Endgame, coming back here to the little benchy wenchy with Sammy Whammy. I love Sammy Whammy. He's my favorite. And then old Steve, that wouldn't have happened because old Steve is in this timeline. If he never goes back to this timeline, as in he never time travels back, which he didn't, if you'll remember, Sam and Bucky were very confused about that and everything. Well, not completely confused, because Steve didn't reappear here. Because he was still in this timeline. He's going to continue through this timeline. Everything he does will remain in this timeline. Nothing in this timeline will happen in this timeline. His timeline is here. Old Steve does not exist here. It's impossible. Not only that, but if this did create another branch, you would think the Time Variance Authority, as established in Loki, would have something to say about that. But no, they don't care because that's a plot hole, and Marvel doesn't like plot holes. Kevin Feige, we don't care about those. We also definitely don't care that Tony Stark was established to have, like, 1 billion canonical birthdays, including 1970, 1974... whoopsies, and 1969, as evidenced in Iron Man 3, Iron Man 1, and literally everything else, unless we consider the adoption theory as such that happen in the comics. However, since they didn't really do that in the MCU, and also Howard Stark, that fucking asshole I fucking despise, because also in the comics, he was an abuser and an alcoholic, and we fucking hate him. But they didn't really do that in the MCU, so guess that just doesn't really happen. Which is why Howard Stark in Agent Carter, remember when we talked about that like a while ago? Yeah. See, I wonder if Agent Carter hadn't happened, do you reckon he still would have married Maria Stark and had Tony Stark? Or, if he was in fact adopted, had Arno Stark, who was, of course, in the comics? Possibly not. If they didn't adopt Tony Stark, would he have had the company? Definitely not. So, Stark Industries, out. Would he have even had that? Probably not. S.H.I.E.L.D. also didn't happen. And if S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't happen, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. didn't happen, which means the whole thing I was talking about with Daniel Sousa, her little huzzy-wuzzy, hubby-wubby, whatever the fuck, also not gonna happen, because he wouldn't be in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Which, I mean, rip Daisy, I guess. But also, nothing in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. happened, which is probably a good thing, since they established completely different rules of time travel. So, any of this, fuck. Any of this, not possible in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Well, because they already broke their own rules, didn't they? Any of this, not possible. They did it wrong. Anyway, thank you.